I had barely lifted my fork when my phone trembled against the tablecloth. A single glance at the screen stole the taste from my mouth. Don't eat. Just trust me. The message was from my mother, seated 3 chairs down, her face a careful mask. Something in my chest tightened like a fist. Beside me, Anthony, my husband, lifted his glass, that hollow, plastic smile curving his lips. Please, enjoy. I didn't yet know the shape of the danger, but I could smell it, thick as smoke. It was the first time I'd been invited back into the Mark family's orbit since the hospital, 3 months since I'd lost the baby after a pregnancy that had been one long, suffocating battle. Monitors, bed rest, endless tests, until there was nothing left to lose but the child itself. I had shed weight, sleep, hope, everything but the memory of pain. And still, his mother had insisted. Time to gather the family, move on, she'd said, as though grief could be erased with roast beef and forced smiles. But with my mother's warning still glowing on my screen and every gaze fixed on me, I felt anything but gathered. My name is Ashley. I'm 34. And this is how unfinished business began to boil into something sharper. At that table in their opulent Steeden dining room, my father-in-law looming at the head, Anthony's 2 brothers trading smug glances, and his ex-wife seated like a guest of honor, I understood the trap. She touched his arm too often, laughed too softly at his jokes, sprinkling our history across the conversation like poisoned crumbs. I wanted to stand and walk out. Instead, I froze. Then my mother caught my eye and mouthed the words, "There's something in your plate." Her gaze flicked toward Anthony's mother, who sat with that familiar, honeyed expression she wore for an audience. The same woman who, in private, had called me fragile, who blamed me for losing the baby, said my body wasn't built for the fight. She had never forgiven me for being the woman her son chose. Now, apparently, she put her verdict directly into my food. The bile rose before the fork did. I forced a pleasant smile, let the conversation roll, and made no move toward my plate. My pulse thudded in my ears. I waited until everyone was busy eating and laughing, then slid my phone between the glasses, camera hidden, audio on. If this was going to be a war, I would start by arming myself. When the moment came, I pushed the untouched plate forward, murmured something about feeling unwell, and excused myself. In the bathroom, I wrapped a piece of the food in a napkin, tucking it deep into my purse. Later, in the car, my mother gripped my hand but said nothing. The silence between us was heavier than words. This wasn't just about one dinner. This was about everything, the quiet humiliations, the contempt buried under polite laughter, the betrayals I was only beginning to uncover. That night, while Anthony slept, I crossed the line from wounded to watchful. I opened his email. And there they were, the messages. Weeks of them. Notes to the ex while I'd been in the hospital. Times and dates matched perfectly. One line carved itself into my mind. She'll give up soon. I didn't cry. I didn't sleep. I took a fresh notebook and wrote the first name. Then the second. Action by action. This wasn't a marriage. It was a board game rigged against me. And I was done playing by their rules. The next morning, I made a call to a private investigator. His voice was low, deliberate. I already know who you are, he said. This isn't the first complaint about that family. Ma'am, don't eat anything that comes from that house. A cold ripple slid down my spine. What do you know? I asked. He paused. Gather your evidence quickly. They've done this before. I hung up and stared at my reflection, pale skin, hollow eyes, the face of someone they wanted to erase. They'd underestimated me. Hatred, cold and patient, began to take shape inside me. I moved through the house like a chess player setting the board. Printed every email, every bank transfer to the ex. Copies hidden in places Anthony would never think to look. If they wanted to see me break, they'd have to watch me rise first. I began collecting their poison like a jeweler gathering rare stones, every cruel word, every veiled insult, every hint of what they truly were. The audio clips of Anthony's mother calling me pathetic or unfit were labeled and stored. Tiny cameras bloomed in corners of the house, invisible as dust. They didn't notice. Why would they? In their eyes, I was already defeated, too broken to fight back. The next day she appeared at my door, unannounced. A pastel-wrapped bouquet in one hand, a box of cookies in the other. "To brighten your day, sweetheart," she cooed, her smile a thin veil over eyes that could cut glass. I stepped aside. "Feeling better?" she asked, all concern and venom. I matched her expression with a brittle smile. "Better than you think." She offered to make tea. I let her. In the kitchen, her movements were slow, unhurried. My hidden camera captured the exact moment she slipped something into the bottom of my mug, no hesitation, no glance over her shoulder. Just the quiet precision of someone who had done this before. I sent the video to the investigator. 20 minutes later, his message lit my screen. "We have enough to open a formal investigation." For the first time in months, I felt something close to power. Not over my pain, but over their fate. And that was nourishment enough. That night, I set my own trap. A dinner in their honor. I invited Anthony, his mother, and, because I wanted her in the frame, his ex. I told them I wanted to make amends, that I was ready to move on. They smiled, mistaking my words for surrender. I documented every moment. The way his mother's laugh was just a little too loud when she called me too sensitive. I raised my glass. "To truth," I said, "and justice." They laughed. So did I. But mine was the kind that hides a blade. I'd been feeling weak for weeks, dizzy, forgetful, heavy-limbed. Everyone said it was grief. Even I began to believe it. Until the investigator called again. "Mrs. Donald," he said, my maiden name, deliberate. "The cookies and tea contained a toxin. Low dosage, but prolonged exposure would cause exactly the symptoms you've described." I gripped the phone. "And if it continues?" "It will get worse. Much worse. You can't stay in that house another night. I'm sending the evidence to the prosecutor. Make an excuse and leave. Immediately." This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was survival. Within an hour, I told Anthony my mother had been injured in a fall and needed me indefinitely. I packed fast: laptop, hard drives, documents. Anything that could be turned into a weapon. He didn't even look up from his phone. "If you want to stay longer, go ahead. It might be good for you." I smiled back. "Oh, it will be." The next night, in a rented room miles from Stephen, I accessed my cameras for the first time. The feed unfolded like a theater of betrayal, his mother rifling through my drawers, the ex draped across my sofa, wine glass in hand, Anthony at my piano, fingers moving across the keys like he was composing a life without me. The pain cut deep. But pain, when you let it cool, becomes strategy. From exile, I began writing every movement, every smirk, every theft of my space. My revenge board filled itself piece by piece. An anonymous complaint went to HR at Anthony's firm, complete with proof of unexplained transfers to his ex. Days later, he was placed on investigative leave. He blamed jealous colleagues. I knew better. Another report went to the hospital's ethics board about his mother. She would now sit in a formal hearing, her reputation bleeding out in whispers. Her colleagues began to avoid her in the corridors. Subpoenas followed the ex. Money from questionable sources has a way of drawing attention. One by one, the walls pressed inward. They didn't even know my hands were on the levers. A week later, I arranged a meeting with my sister-in-law, the only one among them who seemed to have a conscience. She had always seen through their mother's masks. And now, I needed an ally inside the fortress. She was leaving the state for good, and before she disappeared, she handed me a small black flash drive. "The last piece," she whispered, as if even the walls could betray her. On it was a recording from a family lunch, captured weeks earlier without anyone's knowledge. Anthony's voice slid through the speakers, steady, almost bored. "She's more useful alive than dead. But if she keeps getting in the way." The sentence broke off, hanging like a noose in the air. His mother murmured something low. The ex's laugh, light, careless, cut across it like glass. I didn't need to hear more. I sent the file to the investigator. His call came within the hour. "This goes straight to the prosecutor," he said. From now on, you keep your distance. Not a word. We move only when the timing will crush them. But waiting wasn't in my nature anymore. The next day, I built a new online self and slid an anonymous post into a local whistleblower group. No names, just intimate details that only a ghost in their home could know. Within an hour, the town was buzzing. That night, an unsigned email landed in my inbox. No subject line. The first sentence made my skin prickle. You don't know me, but I was at the cafe behind your mother-in-law, your husband, and a blonde woman. I read on. The stranger described their entire conversation, word for word, as if they'd been sitting at the table. They spoke about me, my odd behavior, a document I needed to sign before suspicion set in. The blonde, clearly the ex, asked what they'd do if I refused. My mother-in-law's voice was calm, cutting, "We're already handling it. Her mind is hanging by a thread." The witness said they couldn't walk away in silence. I checked the cafe's location, 2 streets from Anthony's office. A live security feed confirmed the time. His credit card bill confirmed the place. Every piece fit. At the bottom of the email was a single line. If it were me, I'd want someone to warn me, too. It stung, but it also lit the fuse. I sent everything to my lawyer. She studied it for a long moment before saying, "We could file today. But this is still bleeding. If you want to let it bleed slow, now's your chance." I didn't hesitate. Revenge tastes better when it lingers. That night, I compiled an encrypted folder, spliced audio, transcripts, screenshots, and sent it to 3 local Facebook groups. No signature, just a caption. She trusted them. They laughed. Beneath it, "You have to hear it to believe it." 2 hours later, the fire was spreading. From my safe distance, I pictured their faces, searching the shadows, wondering who was pulling the strings. Anthony called that evening. His voice was low, fraying at the edges. "Ashley, do you know what's going on?" I kept my tone light. "Not a clue. I'm with my mother." "Like you suggested. Someone's setting me up. I'm being destroyed. You'd tell me if you knew anything, right?" "Maybe," I said, "it's just the universe putting everyone in their rightful place." And I hung up. The break in his voice was the sound of the first wall giving way. The next day, my lawyer rang again, this time with something worse. An old medical file just arrived. Anonymous sender. "Something's off." She forwarded it. My name. A date from 7 years before I'd even met Anthony. A hospital I didn't know. And at the bottom, clear, deliberate, Dr. Margaret. My mother-in-law's maiden name. Psychiatric observation. Conduct suggested. It made no sense. How could she have been tied to me before I ever stepped into their world? Or had she been there all along, watching from the dark? The signature on that file began to gnaw at me like acid on bone. Dr. Margaret, my mother-in-law's maiden name. Date, August 7th, 7 years ago. Diagnosis, emotional instability, possible adjustment disorder. I'd never stepped foot in that hospital. I would have remembered. And yet, there was my name, my birth date, my insurance number, official and precise. A paper trail for a life I'd never lived. If I had been there, it wasn't by choice. I called the hospital under a false name, posing as a distant relative. The receptionist hesitated but confirmed the record existed in their system. It was a brief, discreet treatment, she said, at the family's request. Family? Whose family? 7 years ago, I hadn't even met Anthony. Or had I, and simply forgotten? I called my mother that same day. The silence on the other end stretched, heavy and strange, before she finally exhaled. "Ashley, there's something you don't know. Maybe you were never meant to. But I think it's time." My pulse thudded. She told me that years earlier, after a devastating car accident, I'd gone through a dark emotional spiral. I'd been hospitalized briefly, she said, under the care of a family acquaintance. She had never told me the name. She admitted she'd trusted the doctor, thought it was just a precaution. Then, nothing. No bills, no records. It had all vanished. You seemed better afterward, she whispered. I thought it was best to move on. I remembered the blackout. Months of my life missing. But was it grief's fog, or had someone deliberately erased pieces of my history? I went back to the file, this time combing through the fine print. That's when I saw it, marginal notes and a cryptic acronym, APE Assessment of Parental Eligibility. My chest tightened. This wasn't a health record, it was an evaluation of whether I was fit to raise children. But in 2018, motherhood hadn't even been on my radar. Was this planted later? Or had someone been setting the stage for years? This wasn't petty family cruelty anymore. This was systemic sabotage. I sent everything to my lawyer. She read it twice before looking up, eyes hard. If your mother-in-law accessed or fabricated psychiatric reports to discredit you, that's not just unethical. That's a federal crime. The case was mutating into something far bigger. The district attorney's office was quietly looped in. My investigator began coordinating with a specialized legal team. But patience had never been my strength. I drafted a new anonymous complaint, this one focused solely on criminal misuse of medical records. I built a digital dossier, my file, Margaret's career history, the manipulated documents, and for the first time, I spelled it all out: names, dates, locations. I knew the press would smell blood. 3 days later, I received a direct message from an investigative journalist. Short, urgent. I need to speak with you. I know this doctor. What she did to you wasn't the first time. The chills came before I even picked up the phone. Her voice was steady but weighted. She'd been tracking Margaret for years. She explained that Margaret maintained close ties with psychiatrists and private clinics, always inserted into sensitive cases involving emotionally vulnerable women. My name had surfaced in a cross-referenced complaint from another victim. You're not the first, Ashley, she said, and you won't be the last unless someone stops her. I couldn't speak. The journalist described another woman, institutionalized against her will during a brutal divorce. Margaret had orchestrated every step with the hospital. And it wasn't an isolated incident. She has a pattern, the journalist continued. Custody battles, contested inheritances, estate disputes, she always sides with the party who wants to erase the woman from the picture. And she's good at it. You weren't random, Ashley. You were selected. Her final question came like a loaded weapon. Will you authorize me to use your documents for a full exposé? The journalist told me the exposé was already in motion, but they needed a current victim with irrefutable proof. I hesitated for only a moment before agreeing, not just for my own revenge, but because silence would mean Margaret could do to another woman exactly what she'd done to me. I sent everything. Within 24 hours, the journalist had cross-referenced my case with 2 others. 3 women, 3 shattered lives, 1 name, Margaret. Meanwhile, on their side, the cracks were widening into fault lines. Anthony was officially suspended from his company. The ex was subpoenaed over illicit transfers. And Margaret, she had vanished. No appearances at the hospital, no word in her social circles. She was hiding, waiting for the inevitable detonation, and she had no idea just how big the blast would be. The DA's office called me in for a formal statement. I walked in carrying originals, files, reports, screenshots, recordings. As I spoke, the room grew still. When I finally said her name, Margaret, one of the prosecutors leaned forward. That name has surfaced in other cases, he said. Always through intermediaries. Never directly. That was about to change. This time, she would be forced to answer with her name, her face, her history laid bare. When I left the building, I found an envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. Heavy cardstock, no return address. Inside, a yellowed newspaper clipping. Margaret's smiling face beside a doctor I didn't recognize. On the back, in a tight, deliberate hand. She's destroyed entire families. But you could be the last. Someone was helping me. Someone close enough to leave evidence where only I would find it. My revenge was no longer just mine, it was becoming something collective, amplified by others who wanted her brought down. 3 days later, the exposé went live. Nurse with ties to psychiatric clinics suspected of manipulating diagnoses to influence inheritance and legal cases. They left my name out, but anyone familiar with the Mark family knew exactly who the shadow victim was. Anthony's phone erupted with calls. The ex wiped every trace of herself from social media. Margaret didn't respond to a single request for comment. But someone did. That night, just past midnight, my phone lit up with a restricted number. The voice on the other end was male, low, deliberate. "You've stirred up people bigger than you know. Be careful what comes next." Then, silence. For the first time, a sliver of real fear slid under my skin. But I'd already crossed too far to retreat. The threat put me on high alert. I hardened my digital defenses, enabled two-factor authentication, scrubbed my online footprint. My lawyer was informed immediately, and she contacted the investigator, who wasted no time calling me in. "You're up against people with connections," he told me. "But you're more protected than you think." It was a strange equilibrium, fear and power, both pressing against my ribs. I went back through every document I'd gathered, scanning for anything I'd missed. That's when I spotted it, a mailing address that appeared in two separate victims' files. It belonged to a medical foundation, supposedly defunct. A quick search pulled up a dusty, outdated website. On the contact page, my stomach dropped. I recognized one of the listed directors, the same doctor in the old photo with Margaret. Pieces were snapping into place. I sent the information to the journalist. She sounded almost breathless. "If this is solid, it goes national. That foundation's taken in millions. If there's medical fraud tied to financial gain, it's a bombshell. And Margaret's the ghost in the machine, the one who manipulates the records, erases the inconvenient, and secures the right heirs." Meanwhile, Anthony was unraveling. His voicemails grew shorter, sharper, more desperate. "Ashley, you win. Okay? Just stop. My life's over." But I recognized the sound in his voice. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of losing the life he thought was untouchable. And I was only just getting started. Anthony wasn't thinking about me. He never had. His loyalty had always begun and ended with himself. But now he had nowhere left to hide. Margaret was still in the wind, but the walls were closing in. The nursing board revoked her license permanently. The hospital launched a quiet internal review. The foundation received formal notification of the investigation. And then the reporter dropped her second piece, this one with new testimonies. Women, like me, who had been branded with fabricated diagnoses, stripped of credibility, and pushed out of their own homes. It was no longer a family feud, it was an exposed pattern. And now, the light was finally hitting it. Even so, one detail kept clawing at me. The signature on my psychiatric file wasn't digital, it was handwritten. And I'd seen that handwriting before. I dug into my safe and pulled out our domestic partnership contract, the one I'd signed before marrying Anthony. The same looping P, the same forward-leaning H. My gut turned. I had signed a document drafted, manipulated, by her. I went to my hard drive and found the wedding paperwork archive. There it was, an earlier draft without the separate property clause. That was the one I remembered reviewing. It had never been filed. The version I signed was the one that left me with nothing. My throat tightened. This hadn't been chaos, it had been choreography. From the beginning, every step had been staged. But now it was my turn to write the final act. That night, an email landed in my inbox. No message, just a single attachment. A photograph taken from across the street, aimed at the building where I was staying. The angle suggested someone in a car, maybe on foot. The timestamp was from that same evening at sunset. In the bottom corner, in red type, "Are you alone now?" It wasn't a direct threat, it was worse. A taunt. They wanted me rattled. Instead, they gave me a reason to move faster. I called my lawyer. "Start annulment proceedings on the domestic partnership contract," I said, and sent her every piece of evidence, the conflicting drafts, the psychiatric reports, the handwriting comparisons. "This could turn criminal," she told me. forgery, contract fraud, emotional abuse. He'll walk away with less than he came in. Exactly as I intended. I hired a forensic handwriting expert. Her conclusion was blunt: same writer, same strokes, Margaret's disguised signature threaded through the contract as a witness, altering multiple sections. That was enough to void the agreement entirely. My lawyer's voice was almost smiling. You're not just keeping your rights, you're becoming the name on the case. This time, the record will carry your name. That night, I executed the step I'd been quietly preparing for weeks. I uploaded my entire archive to a secure cloud, documents, messages, recordings, and shared the link with 2 journalists in different states. No photo of me, no voice, just the paper trail. 3 names attached: Margaret, Joshua, and the ex-wife. Every file labeled, dated, location stamped. It couldn't be buried anymore. Even if they silenced me, the truth would keep breathing. The ripples on their side were immediate. The ex scrubbed her social media. Margaret's phone went dark. Anthony reached out, not to me, but to my mother, claiming he feared for my mental health. Her reply made my chest tighten. Ashley isn't crazy. She's just not quiet anymore. For the first time, I felt her fully on my side. And it gave me steel. The investigator's update came the next day. Margaret had been located in another state, hiding at a cousin's house. She was already trying to paint herself as the victim of a smear campaign. But the reporter who'd been shadowing the case was already on the road to see her. And this time, Margaret wouldn't get to choose the narrative. The prosecutor's office in Margaret's new state was already mobilizing, and one by one, the women she'd silenced were stepping into the light. It wasn't just the start of her fall, it was the slow, grinding kind of destruction that eats away piece by piece, until there's nothing left to salvage. But the danger still breathed around me. The next warning came by mail, a thin envelope, unmarked. Inside, a single sheet with 7 words scrawled across the middle. If you keep going, you'll lose everything. At the bottom, a signature I knew too well, a defense attorney infamous for protecting the corrupt and the violent. Margaret wasn't alone. She still had powerful hands shielding her. But unlike her, I had something she'd lost: people willing to fight for the truth. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an alert. One of my secure cloud folders had been accessed over 20,000 times in just 6 hours. The truth was spreading faster than either of us could control. Then another ping. A failed login attempt on my bank account. It was retaliation. And it meant they were feeling the heat. But before I could even process it, something unexpected arrived. An encrypted email. No sender. No subject line. Just a single PDF and one message. She took my career, but not my memory. The document was devastating. It came from a psychiatrist who had once worked beside Margaret at the hospital. Years ago, he'd tried to report her for falsifying diagnoses, altering prescriptions, and shaping medical records to benefit well-connected families. He'd been accused of misconduct, stripped of his position, and erased from the system. Now, with my case in the headlines, he was speaking up. The report contained everything: altered patient charts, signed instructions from Margaret, even an email suggesting that a patient be sedated to make getting the consent easier. The victim in that case wasn't me, but the pattern was identical. I sent it to my lawyer and the journalist. Both confirmed it was genuine. The third article broke that week: Margaret's full name, her career history, her methods, all laid bare. The response was explosive. Major outlets picked it up. The National Medical Board issued a statement. The hospital where she'd built her power base claimed it was appalled. The foundation's accounts were locked for audit. And I stayed silent, because my absence was now its own kind of weapon. Then Anthony called. His voice was wrecked, shaking. He swore he'd never understood the depth of his mother's manipulations, claimed his affair was weakness, insisted he'd been caught between Margaret and the ex. I waited, then answered flatly. You weren't caught. You were comfortable. And I ended the call. My justice wouldn't come from his remorse, it would come from the ruin he couldn't escape. With the evidence stacked high, my lawyer filed a combined action: annulment of the domestic partnership contract, damages for emotional harm, and an immediate freeze of all his and Margaret's assets. The judge granted it on the spot. 72 hours later, their accounts were locked. The beach house they used as a trophy went up for sale in a rush, but it was already too late. Margaret now had an official criminal record, and the collapse was public. Still, they clawed back. A new blow came in the form of an extrajudicial notice, defamation, signed by Margaret's lawyer. I didn't bother crafting a reply. I simply attached the psychiatrist's report, my audio files, and every damning screenshot, and forwarded the entire package to the prosecutor's office. The investigator called not long after. "They're trying to turn the tables," he said. "But this was my game now. And I wasn't done playing." "Time to accelerate," the investigator said, and I understood, the last pillar of Margaret's empire was about to collapse. That evening, the reporter's voice came through the phone low and tense, the kind of tone people use when they're looking over their shoulder. "I spoke with someone from Margaret's past," she said. "What I learned changes everything. This isn't just about lies and manipulation, there may be a body in her wake. Ashley, this could be about ending something that should never have begun." Her source was the niece of a woman who died in 2016. The official report read cardiac arrest. But the timing was suspicious. The victim was in the middle of a vicious divorce and a fight over a large inheritance. The clinic? One where Margaret served as an outside consultant. The final prescription was signed by Margaret herself. The documentation was thin, intentionally vague, same style, same handwriting I'd seen before. For the first time, someone used the phrase forced euthanasia. No concrete proof yet, but the pattern was undeniable. And now that Margaret's name was public, other stories began to surface. This wasn't a one-off, it was a system. A carefully shielded structure that had stood for decades. And I was dismantling it, piece by piece, with patience and evidence. The prosecutor's office turned the heat up, cross-checking Margaret's former patients with family court and inheritance disputes. The overlaps were glaring. Custody fights, contested wills, sudden medical declines, it was all there. She had been the invisible hand behind countless family tragedies. And I was her final attempt at repeating the cycle. She failed because I refused to play my part. The next morning, the investigator called again. "The DA wants you to testify at a public hearing. They want you to be the face of the case." The thought made my stomach tighten. For months, I'd stayed in the shadows, letting my silence work for me. But now, stepping forward meant protecting others. It felt right, not as a victim stepping into the light, but as a survivor who'd dragged the truth into it. At the hearing, I laid everything out, the altered contracts, the handwriting matches, the kind tea laced with poison, the fabricated psychiatric reports. I showed them the paper trail, step by step. The room was silent when I finished. Then, soft applause. Some women were crying. One took my hand and whispered, "She almost did this to me, too." That moment told me my pain had become something else, a shield for others. 2 weeks later, Margaret was indicted. The DA called it one of the most elaborate schemes of medical and financial manipulation in recent memory. Anthony lost every position of trust he'd clung to. The ex faced charges for conspiracy. The foundation was dissolved under court order. Every move had landed exactly where I'd aimed it. My revenge was never meant to be loud, it was meant to be final. I returned to my house, the home they'd tried to take from me. I stripped it of their presence. Painted over their shadows. Changed the locks. On one wall, I hung a single new frame, the lawsuit, my name at the top in bold. It was more than justice. It was proof. A week later, another letter arrived. White envelope. No return address. Inside, one line in neat handwriting. I just wanted to be heard. I knew it was from my sister-in-law, the only one who had walked away before the collapse. I placed it in my bedside drawer. I didn't respond. Because when you've broken the kind of monsters who weaponize love, the sharpest revenge is never stepping back into their cage. After the convictions, the silence inside my home changed. It wasn't heavy anymore, it was alive. I opened every window. Let the air rush in. painted doors, changed sheets. And for the first time in years, I was breathing my own air. The changes I made to the house were small, but they were mine: fresh paint on the doors, new sheets on the bed, light where there used to be shadows. For the first time in years, I could move through each room without tasting the memory of every poisoned kindness. Revenge had leveled their empire. Rebuilding myself, that was the harder task. Tearing someone down gives you a target, a reason to wake up. Freedom forces you to face yourself. And I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that marriage. I was sharper now, less willing to believe in beautiful words, and more loyal to myself than to any promise. I started therapy. Slowly, I learned that justice can knit wounds together, but it never smooths the scars. My mother drifted back into my life. Where there had been stiffness and distance, there was now care and apology. She said she regretted the silences, the misplaced trust, the moments she didn't step between me and harm. She told me she was proud I'd held on to my mind. I told her the truth, that I'd lost it, just in a way that allowed me to survive. She cried. I cried. Sometimes the longest family wars are the ones fought without words, in years of quiet. We ended that war together. The reporter contacted me again. Her article had been nominated for a national award. But what she wanted to thank me for was different, for proving that revenge doesn't have to be loud to be devastating. She said more women had stepped forward after my testimony, that cases once buried were being reopened, and that Margaret's name, once spoken with deference, now curdled the air in certain offices. I began writing my story. Not for publication, not for the public, just to remember. To make sure I would never again mistake survival scraps for love. I gave each piece its own chapter: the night my mother warned me not to eat, the day I was called unstable, the moment I realized someone had tried to erase me completely. And the day I knew I no longer needed revenge, because it was already finished. Then a message came from my ex-sister-in-law. She had moved to another state, cradling a newborn daughter. She was naming the baby Ashley. Because you showed me what strength without shouting looks like. I broke down for hours. It wasn't about recognition. It was knowing my pain hadn't been wasted, that someone who had seen it all understood there's a way forward after cruelty, and justice after silence. Some nights I still wake with my pulse racing, my body remembering the trap. But now I breathe, look around, and remind myself, I am out. They tried to hollow me from the inside. Instead, they were the ones dragged into the open. Revenge didn't turn me into a villain. It scraped the guilt off my skin. When we endure in silence, we're called weak. When we speak, we're called unhinged. But when we win, there's nothing left for them to say. Then one afternoon, the phone rang. Private number. A calm woman's voice: "You know me, but you don't know what I know." Before I could speak, she added, "Margaret didn't act alone." And the line went dead. Those words echoed for days. I tried to summon faces I'd overlooked, names I'd pushed aside while just trying to stay alive. Nothing came, until 2 days later, the reporter emailed me. "You need to see this." Attached was a letter sent to her newsroom, signed by a former financial director of the foundation where Margaret had been a consultant. According to him, Margaret never made her moves alone. There was always someone else, a man who stayed out of sight, never linked publicly, but listed as the foundation's primary donor, a retired attorney. Kenneth. The name made my stomach twist. He had been the family lawyer on my father-in-law's side. My mother later confirmed he was the one who had arranged my brief hospitalization years before. I had no memory of it. But when I started digging, his name surfaced in 3 other cases tied to Margaret. Always behind the curtain, always the advisor or donor, never the public face of the scandal. Yet woven into the foundation of every scheme. The realization came slow, like a shadow stretching across the floor: Margaret had never been the head of the snake. She was the blade, not the hand. Someone else paid for the cuts, erased the fingerprints, and made sure every trail vanished before it could be followed. My revenge was close to finished, but I'd never touched the architect. I took Kenneth's name to the DA. The investigator didn't look surprised. He surfaced in other complaints, he admitted, but always untouchable. The right friends, the right reputation. They were preparing to rip open his bank and communications records. Will that be enough to take him down? I asked. Maybe, the investigator said, but if it hits the headlines before the courtroom, the damage will run deeper. That was when I knew, this wasn't just my fight anymore. The system itself wanted in. I met my attorney and told her Bellman's name belonged in my lawsuit. She raised an eyebrow. He's dangerous. Then she leaned in. But you've already beaten people who thought they were untouchable. Let's finish it. We started gathering every thread: financial transfers, phone records, shell company ties, wrongful commitments, manipulated estates. Each connection between Bellman and Margaret was locked into place like a tile in a mosaic. Then I found the piece that made my stomach turn. Bellman's signature appeared on the registry paperwork for my marriage contract. He was the technical verifier, the man who confirmed the altered version as legitimate. He had known, from the very start, that it was rigged to leave me with nothing. This hadn't been chance. It was a legal snare, engineered with precision. And I'd stepped into it like every other target before me. But now I had the blueprint. And I was going to weaponize it. I gave the full dossier to the reporter. Her next article hit with the force of a detonation. The man behind Margaret: how a shadow lawyer bankrolled the nation's largest emotional and financial manipulation scheme. Kenneth's name was finally in black and white. While he scrambled to block the story, I was at the courthouse filing my petition, Ashley Parker vs. Kenneth et al. This time, his name came after mine. That night, another envelope appeared. Inside, Margaret's photograph in court. On the back, written in sharp pen strokes, "You only got this far because I let you." Also enclosed, a bank account number. Offshore. The record of a $20,000 transfer made by Bellman 2 days before Margaret signed the medical recommendation that put me in that clinic. The money came from a shell company and went directly to the facility. Purpose line: emergency agreement. It was the missing piece, proof that I had been chemically silenced for a price. And now the buyer had a name, a signature, and a history. I handed it to the DA. The machine moved quickly. Bellman was summoned. He hid behind his lawyers, insisting he helped families through difficult transitions. But the paper trail was clear: forged contracts, illicit transfers, ties to Margaret's schemes, it all funneled back to him. The court accepted full charges. He was indicted in my case and in at least 6 more uncovered after the exposé. Some women only realized they had been victims when they saw their own stories in mine. We became a coalition, quiet, relentless, and unbreakable. Shared pain forged into collective power. My ex-husband clung to the scraps of his image, posting self-pitying monologues online. His ex vanished. Margaret, convicted and stripped of her license, sat under house arrest awaiting her criminal trial. And me? I wasn't building on ruins anymore. I was building on ground I'd claimed for myself, on my voice, my clarity, my truth. 1 year after it began, the journalist sat across from me in a studio for a final interview. "Do you regret starting all of this?" she asked. I didn't blink. I regret not starting sooner. Because the truth is, every silenced woman carries an invisible clock inside her, marking the days, the months, the years she spent believing she was fragile, dramatic, unstable, when in reality, she was simply surviving in the shadows of someone else's comfort. After the interview, I went home. I sat on the porch, eyes closed, and let the wind move around me. It was soft now, not a warning but a welcome. I didn't crave applause, validation, or headlines. I only wanted a life that was mine, clean, untainted, and free. And now, it was. A message arrived on my phone: the Bellman case had been moved to federal court. I smiled, because it was no longer my fight to lead. What had begun as a whisper, then grown into a silent scream, had become a war the state itself had chosen to carry forward. Today, I live in a home wrapped in quiet, the kind of quiet that soothes instead of suffocates. I can eat without suspicion. Sleep without bolting the door 3 times. Laugh without scanning the room for danger. My life feels whole again, stitched together not by luck but by my own hands. The people around me now are the ones I chose. A circle I built myself. And somewhere in the calm, love found me, unexpected, patient, and real. A man who never raised his voice but always hears me. Someone who didn't arrive to rescue me, I'd already done that, but who walks beside me without trying to control where I'm going. He knows my story, every scar, every shadow, every page, and maybe because of that, he loves me with a kind of gentleness I once thought belonged only in fiction. We plant flowers together, watching them take root in soil that finally feels safe. The past hasn't vanished, but it no longer owns me. And that, more than any verdict or headline, is what victory really looks like.